Hello and welcome to Minds of Mountainfilm. I'm Chris Jordan and I'm joined by the young, amazing, ass-kicking activist, Tim DeChristopher.
How you doing, Chris?
Good. Well, Tim, I want to ask you something kind of personal and emotional that I've heard you talk about before.
Okay, we'll just jump right into it then, I guess, huh? Right into the emotional part. Good.
Yeah. Let's talk about fear.
Yeah.
You've done something incredibly courageous in your life and something that most people just wouldn't have the courage to do, and I'm curious how you manage the fear.
I mean, that is a big issue, because I can't claim that, like, oh, I'm not afraid of it. I realize that I'm very likely going to prison, and that's a pretty horrific place to be, so I can't claim that I'm not afraid of that. But on the other hand, I've been afraid for my future for a long time now, and afraid of much bigger and more horrific things than just a couple years in prison. When I look at the path that we're on, and the consequences of climate change and what that really means for human beings, not just like stopping at like, oh, that many species lost or that high level of sea level rise, but what that means for us. To me, that looks like the collapse of our society and kind of devolving into this chaotic and violent and really, really desperate world where people are doing whatever they have to do to survive. And that's within my lifetime. Once I really started internalizing that, I've never been able to shake that. I mean, not for a day can I get that vision of where we're headed out of my mind, and that's much scarier than any of the consequences that might face me from jail and things like that. It's kind of like to strap on a parachute and jump out of a plane. It takes some courage. You have to overcome your fear to step out and do that. But not if the plane's on fire and heading down fast. Then it's like strapping on the parachute and jumping out the door is just the only thing that makes sense. And I kind of feel like we're at that point. Standing up to the power structures and risking time in jail. Sure, that's scary, but it's a whole lot less scary than being complicit right now. I think that's the scariest thing.
So people think of you as being this incredibly courageous person, and are you saying that you're not really that courageous?
Yeah, I feel like I'm motivated out of fear most of the time. One of the things that I really appreciate about your work is that you invite people to dig into those emotions. I remember last year when we presented together, you brought up the fact that we're always told to be positive and hopeful, and we're not supposed to have these negative emotions like fear and outrage and things like that. But that those things are real. We are feeling those. We're living in this crisis, and those emotions are a real part of human nature, and they're there for a reason. They evolved that way. All of our ancestors who were faced with some threat and didn't feel fear, or their children were threatened and they didn't feel outrage, they all died off. And now that we're all critically threatened and our children are critically threatened, if we don't feel fear and outrage and find a productive way to act upon that, then we should expect to meet the same fate as all those dead-end roads of human evolution. It's obviously not the same kind of threats we faced, back when it was saber-toothed tigers that we were fighting off. We can't just pick up a big stick and beat climate change to death. So we need to balance that emotion with our rational mind of what's going to be an effective action. But I think acknowledging and dealing with that emotion is certainly a key part of it. And I think that's what a lot of your work is about. It just kind of draws out those emotions of the point that we're working in. And so, what kind of reaction have you had when you try to bring up these very painful emotions for people? You just had a theater full of people crying. Is that normal for you?
Kind of, yeah. It's interesting because I spent up until very recently in my life thinking that there are all these bad feelings, anger, rage, grief, shame, anxiety, that if I feel them, that means something is wrong.
Yeah.
And I need to get rid of those feelings as fast as I can and fix them or cure them or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to realize lately that just what you said, that like those are natural human emotions, especially right now.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is interesting is the resistance to feeling those things is actually it causes more suffering than actually feeling those feelings. Because like a feeling of anger, if you hate that feeling, you don't want to feel angry, and you hate the part of you that feels angry and resist feeling angry, then it just sort of gets stuck and locks in. And the actual anger, if you could just express it,
Mm-hmm.
it goes by really fast and always morphs into something else.
Yeah.
And hopelessness is like that. I think there are a lot of people that are feeling hopeless right now, and they're not talking about it. And it just sort of lodges in the heart. But if you can get a bunch of people saying, I feel hopeless, oh, you feel hopeless too? Well, we both feel hopeless, a whole room full of people feels hopeless, then suddenly it morphs into something else, and tears come, or passion comes, and then there's like this kind of natural flow that is the way it ought to be.
Yeah. Now you were talking about trying to find a reason to be hopeful, and how you feel that hopelessness, and then you try to look for something to find hope. And that's a big discussion that I've seen with a lot of activists at this point of hope. Derek Jensen talks about beyond hope, and letting go of hope, and then coming to a point of action. Then other people like Rebecca Solnit talk about all the reasons that we should be hopeful and keep working. And I don't know if it's a semantical difference or what. So what's the hope that you're looking for? I mean, what does that mean to you that we need to be finding a reason to hope?
Well, hope is one of those things, when you start looking at it, it kind of evaporates on you. It's an interesting concept because hope it's like something that happens, it's something that's going to happen in the future. It's like happiness, it's something we're striving for and we can't ever seem to get to.
Yeah.
And hope is like that. And it's also this passive. Hope is passive.
Yeah.
It's like, I have hope that other stuff is going to happen in the world that's going to make my life better.
Yeah.
It's this passive thing that we just, and my other experience with hope is, it's like what hope is for me, it's either an optimism or a pessimism about how the world is going to go based on my worldview. So if I read 3 bad articles in the newspaper, I feel hopeless because it seems like the world's going to hell. But then I read 3 good articles, or I meet an activist or whatever, well, now I feel hopeful. And it's this kind of roller coaster ride. And what I'm trying to do is disconnect my ability to do my work from the roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
And so hope is an interesting thing. But I don't want to totally let go of it because it is motivating. Like I have this sense, and I think I heard it from you today too, that an almost utopian world is just sitting out there just beyond our reach. We could change our government. We could take good care of our animals.
Yeah.
And it could happen. And I'm hopeful that it's going to happen. And I see tons of passionate ass kickers out there making it happen, and I'm incredibly hopeful about that.
Yeah, it's a weird subject that I've kind of battled around for a while, because in a lot of ways I feel like what pushed me to action, what made me an effective activist was letting go of hope. Actually with some of the Mountainfilm guests and speakers were part of that process for me a few years ago of kind of destroying my hope. Folks like Terry Root, who told me the truth that it's probably too late to avoid any of the worst case consequences that we're talking about. That kind of destroyed my hope that I could have any kind of normal life as defined by my parents' and grandparents' generation.
Yeah.
That idea of a future for me kind of died and never came back. But by letting go of that, I also found that I had nothing to lose, and the power structures that keep us in control through their ability to take things away from us no longer really had that much power, because I had already mourned the loss of everything that they could take away from me. And so there was a tremendous empowerment of getting rid of that hope. And another part of that was last year's guest, Bill McKibben. He was always somebody that I looked to as like somebody that's going to make things okay. Like he's this brilliant guy who gets it, and he's an activist, and he's going to lead us. He's going to do what we need to do. And I hold on to this hope that things were going to be okay because we had people like Bill McKibben, and he could take care of it all. And he's just this huge, powerful man, and I hold on to my hope because of people like him. And it was actually when I met him for the first time in person and spent a little time with him that I realized that he's just a normal guy. Like, he's smart and he has a lot of information about what's going on, but he's not any kind of superhero, and there's no reason that he is necessarily in a better position than any of the rest of us to solve this problem. And when I lost my hope that people like Bill McKibben would make things okay, is when I kind of allowed myself to be a leader.
Step into your power.
Yeah. And it was that realization that there's nobody else out there that is necessarily any better equipped to solve this problem than I am, and I might be my own best hope for a livable future. And that was a panicky thought. I mean, when that clicked in me that I was my own best hope, that was like despair, because that's a hard thing to deal with, but it's also really empowering.
So where do you think some of the most powerful activism is happening right now? What's the leading edge of activism at the moment?
That's a good question. I mean, as far as the climate movement, I think West Virginia is probably ground zero for that, and the battle against mountaintop removal. I think there's some powerful activism that's happening there, and maybe it's just my own bias towards viewing things holistically, but I think some of the most encouraging things are the people that are really trying to tackle the fundamental issues, kind of at the root problems. I look at folks like David Cobb and the Democracy Unlimited group that's pushing for a constitutional amendment to end corporate personhood. I mean, that's a huge, holistic, like 20-year battle that they're looking at, but it's really at the heart of a lot of our issues that we're dealing with, and something that's standing in the way of most of our solutions. And so I think a lot of those folks working on issues of corporate personhood are some of the leading edge. Where do you see it?
Well, I've been around a bunch of people lately who are working inside the boardrooms of corporations and transforming the corporations from the inside out. There's this whole little cottage industry of people who are doing like what they call corporate interventions.
Yeah.
And they go in as a kind of inspirational speaker kind of model and give the epiphany to a whole group of people in a corporation and just help them connect with who they are and what they really value in the world, and show them a movie about the cosmos and what our place is in the grand picture, and reconnect them with nature and with their feelings, and cool stuff is happening there.
Yeah. Where do you see that going? I mean, do you think that that's being effective?
Well, the people who are doing it they're sort of going for the low-hanging fruit to start with, because it's a new concept and lots of different people are trying it in different ways. They're doing it as a workshop or as a speech or as a an immersive weekend or whatever. And so they're going for the corporations that are already showing some interest in it to start with, and kind of honing it for the Monsantos and the Dows and the BPs.
Yeah, and this is where I get into a battle with a lot of environmentalists that I actually find that really disempowering. That we're kind of looking at this big corrupt force in our society, which is corporations that have been extremely destructive, and we think if we were going to solve these problems, we have to appeal to that power structure and appeal to corporations to want to change. And we're kind of like begging our corporate masters to rule us in a slightly less destructive way. And that really bothers me. I mean, I just think I don't know if in the 1850s there was a slaveholder social responsibility movement that tried to encourage slave owners to, you know, be a little friendlier towards their slaves. But if there was, I don't think I would have been a part of it. I think I would have been an abolitionist for the same reason that I'm not a part of the corporate social responsibility movement today. I'm working to end corporate personhood. I mean, I think if we're ever going to get to a truly healthy and just world, we need to change that power system and make corporations subservient to human beings. And a part of me wonders if by appealing to them to solve these immediate problems, we're kind of just strengthening that power structure.
Affirming the existence of the structure.
We're reaffirming it.
Interesting. Well, I mean, you're a badass, dude. I love what a fearless badass you are. Like, you must have thought a lot about like where that comes from. You seem like a real warrior. How do you pass that along? Like, what is it? Is it what we talked about in terms of fear, or like, is there something else?
Some of it. I mean, I think part of it is just necessity of being a warrior. I mean, because, you know, when I really started internalizing how serious the climate crisis was, my first reaction to that was, that's a war against us. That's a war that our business and political leaders are waging against my generation. And I felt very attacked. And it took me a long time, but I mean, right before that auction, when I committed that I was going to do something, and that I was willing to really fight back, I mean, I did feel like I was making that decision to be a warrior, you know, and I was letting go of some of the things in my life, like I was kind of, you know, like packing up and going off to war, and that's really how it felt. I mean, beyond that, where it comes from, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of influences. I mean, my mom is kind of a warrior, and kind of a badass. So some of it certainly came from her and the example she set when we were growing up in West Virginia, and she was battling the coal companies when I was a toddler.
Okay.
But you know, I think also a lot of it was just the amount of time I've spent in the wilderness, and how big of a role that's played in my upbringing, because I think that changes our way of thinking about things. You know, when we're absorbed into society, our thinking is really limited to what society tells us to think. And when we can really detach from that, which is what wilderness allows us to do, you know, it frees our mind, and allows us to think independently. Then we're able to really approach things from a more honest and genuine perspective. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that before the auction, I had spent 5 years working with kids in the outdoors, and most of that time in the wilderness, and especially the 2 years right before that, I pretty much lived in the West Desert of Utah. Much more often than not, I was out in the West Desert of Utah, and during that whole 5 years, I felt fairly detached from society. And you know, I wasn't an activist during that time. I wasn't really politically engaged.
But deeply connecting with the land.
Yeah, and also detaching myself, or detaching my way of thinking. And you know, so I was in that kind of independent thinking mindset. And when you do that, and you come back to the world that we have, you think, this is crazy, right? I mean, like when we see it every day, we just kind of come to accept it, and we get this tolerance of this maddening way of living that's self-destructive and not fulfilling, and suicidal. And when we can detach from that, and have that wilderness experience, we come back
and see it.
Yeah, we come back and say, this is unacceptable. And I think that's probably why so many of our revolutionaries have spent a good amount of time in the wilderness, from Jesus to Edward Abbey. You know, they all had that moment where they were detached and became independent thinkers. And that's kind of like a freedom from the the slavery of our society. And I think a lot of people, experience that freedom and don't ever want to go back, which is reasonable. But when I experienced that and then looked back, it felt like it wasn't enough just to be free from that slavery. I wanted to go back and free everyone else and kill the bastards who kept us in chains. And so I think all of that played a role. I mean, I think your story is more interesting, though. I mean, I felt like mine.
We're just about out of time.
Oh
so
no! You got
to wrap up.
No, we don't.
No way! You
we
you
don't.
were so interesting. I didn't want to stop. But I've got to end. This is Minds of Mountainfilm. I'm Chris Jordan, and we've been joined by Tim DeChristopher. Thanks for watching.